Welcome back to the Baseball Odds Watch podcast, episode number 4. Some heavy favorites have struggled, almost 2 no-hitters, only one, and movement all over the standings this past week. So let's dive right in. It's the beginning of a new month. Actually, I'm a little late. I'm a week late. So let's go to the World Series odds and let's count them down the top 5 as we always do. So 5th favorites as we look at the new month, new World Series odds. 5th favorites are the Braves at plus 1,100. They're 60-52. They're holding a wild card spot right now. Marcell Ozuna is still leading the league in RBIs, and Chris Sale is still leading the league in wins and in ERA. Or I shouldn't say still leading the league, but Chris Sale leads the league in wins and ERA. The 4th favorites to win the World Series. 4th favorites are the Orioles. Back and forth with first place in the AL East and the wild card at 67-47. Anthony Santander has the second most home runs, but as a team, the Orioles have the most home runs in the majors. 3rd favorites are the Yankees. Also back and forth between first place in the AL East and the wild card spot. Aaron Judge is having an insane season. 47 home runs, 103 RBIs. He leads the league in both. I mean, the guy's incredible. 2nd favorites are the Phillies. First place in the NL East at 67-46. This team is really just all together. 2nd best NL team ERA, 2nd most NL team hits. But still the favorites are the Dodgers. They're 66-48, best in the NL West. Shohei Ohtani is leading the league in home runs, batting average, and 2nd most RBIs, again behind Marcell Ozuna. He might win the Triple Crown. Dodgers might win the World Series, and Ohtani might be the first DH to win the World Series. Ohtani might be the first DH to win the MVP. So, if you're watching this on IG, make sure you follow and listen to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. For those listening, we'll move on and we'll stay with the National League West because there's a lot going on in the National League West. It has again become the Wild Wild West, and it's one of the more exciting divisions again this year, and it wasn't for a while. So I'm glad to see things are where they are. Again, the Dodgers, obviously favorites to win the World Series, so obviously favorites to win the NL West. They're in first, minus 750 to win the NL West. Just mentioned what Ohtani's been doing. I actually made a video this offseason. It was one of the first videos on Instagram of whether or not Ohtani could be the first DH to win MVP. And all of a sudden, right, it's looking like it. And when you think back to all the great DHs we've had, Edgar Martinez, David Ortiz, none of those guys have come close to winning an MVP. When you look at the spectrum of the National League, who can you make a better case for to win the MVP? It's not like what Ohtani's doing is easy. I mean, I'm sure it's easier than DHing and pitching, but by no means is it easy to lead the league in average. By no means is it easy to lead the league in home runs. He's doing both in the National League. 2nd in RBI, so he's right there for that Triple Crown. And if he wins the Triple Crown and you don't give him the MVP, I mean, what are we doing here, right? But that's the Dodgers. We know about all the moves that they made at the trade deadline, and did they really need them? I've mentioned that there were PTSD moves, but whatever works, right? The Dodgers are, I'm sure, trying to win a championship outside of the championship they won in 2020 because it was 2020. Everybody's going to question the legitimacy still of that championship. So I'm sure they want to get out of the shadow of that and win one for real. If they win it this year, everyone's complaint will be, oh, well, they were a super team. This is baseball, dude. If one dude could win a World Series, then the Angels would have a bunch of World Series. But this is not how this goes. Ohtani, no matter what he does, can't do it by himself. So good on the Dodgers. If you're a Dodgers fan, I'm sure you're happy. I'm sure you're not complaining. I wouldn't be either. So good on the Dodgers for doing what everyone wants their team to do, and that's just continue to go out and get good players so you can always have a chance to win. Moving on to the Padres, all of a sudden they have the top wild card spot. They're minus 345 favorites to make the playoffs, and they're only 4 games back from the division. And somebody commented a few weeks ago, I believe it was, that the Dodgers better look out because the Padres, they could make a run. And now all of a sudden, right, when you look at the spectrum of the wild card and you see a team is 4 games back, you're like, oh, they can make it, right? Why aren't we saying that about the Padres stealing the division? They can do it. It's only a 4-game difference, and I'm sure they've got to play each other again. I think I actually didn't check the schedule on that, but they're 9-2 in their last 10 games. The Padres are. They took 2 out of 3 from the Orioles in that 10-game stretch. They took 2 out of 2 from the Dodgers in that 10-game stretch, and they're playing the Pirates. They won last night against the Pirates in a shutout. Pirates, a team that's trying to get into the playoffs. Luis Ariz is leading the league in hits, so good on the Padres for making that move when they did versus getting him at the deadline, because I think that worked out better for Luis Ariz as well. I don't think Luis Ariz is hitting the way he's hitting if he would have stayed in Miami until the trade deadline. And then Dylan Cease, coming off of that no-hitter, he's leading the NL in strikeouts all of a sudden. So, all those moves the Padres made are panning out for them. And all of a sudden, they are a real threat to take that division. So, when you hear that minus 750 Dodgers favorites to win the NL West, you should be questioning Vegas a little bit. We should be questioning Vegas a little bit because Dodgers are 4-6 their last 10 games. Padres are all of a sudden only 4 games back. I don't know that minus 750 tells the story of what's going on there. So, yeah, I don't agree with a minus 750 for the division. I do agree with them being favorites, but minus 750 is a little steep, if you ask me, especially when you're also giving minus 345 favorites for the Padres to make the playoffs. Doesn't add up. But then again, these are odds made by humans, so I guess it doesn't really have to. The Diamondbacks, they have the second wild card spot now. They didn't have that a week ago. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast on a Wednesday is there's baseball on in the background if you watch us on YouTube. And right now the Diamondbacks are playing against the Guardians behind me. But the Diamondbacks right now, before this game ends at least, hold that second wild card spot. Minus 240 to make the playoffs, plus 178 to not make them. They're also 8-2 in the last 10 games. And guess what? Last week, I told you guys about this series they had coming up with the Pirates over the weekend. They beat them. They won that series. And they took 2 out of 3. So the Diamondbacks, the National League champions, the reigning National League champions, they're right where they were last year in that wild card race. And they showed everybody last year all they got to do is get in and they can shake things up. Well, they're kind of a juggernaut from that wild card spot right now, if you ask me. The Giants, they're 4.5 games out, from a wild card in that NL West. 7-3 in the last 10 games. But the big kicker here, we talked about how Blake Snell is finding it. He's starting to get it together. He threw a no-hitter against the Reds. So back-to-back weeks with a no-hitter from an NL West team. This time it was Blake Snell. He's got it, right? When you look at the team that he pitched against, it's the Reds, man. They can find ways to get hits. Ellie De La Cruz can turn an infield grounder into a single, maybe even a double, right? Jonathan India's been hot. Tyler Stevenson's been hot. Noelvi Marte. I mean, this is an offensive powerhouse that's building and brewing in Cincinnati. And Blake Snell, who rarely gets past the 5th inning or the 6th inning, goes against them and throws a no-hitter. Now, plus 500 to make the playoffs. So, big underdogs to even get there at 4.5 games out from a wild card. Minus 750 favorites to miss the playoffs. But don't count them out just yet. 4.5 is not that far. Granted, yeah, you've got a few teams in front of you. You've got the Pirates, the Cardinals, the Mets. To get into the wild card, you got to get past all them. But it's a team that can do it. They've got the pitching to do it. It's not just Snell. It's Robbie Ray, too. I mean, it's doable for sure. So, the NL West, again, the wild NL West, pretty much every team in contention except for the Rockies. They're in a rebuild. Sure, I get it. Fine. I need part of that rebuild to be maintenance around the stadium. Because what happened yesterday in that Mets game, unacceptable. Essentially, you were awarded a run because you left a hole in the fence to the dugout. Right? That was nobody's fault. That was not the player's fault that there was this hole there and no one patched it, no one fixed it. But they were awarded a run. And they won the game. There's a solid future in Colorado. Right? When we talk about teams that are rebuilding, you've got Ezekiel Tovar, got Brenton Doyle, got Elias Diaz. It's a team that can do things. But it's a rebuild team, and I think part of that rebuild should be some stadium maintenance because that's unacceptable. And if I'm Carlos Mendoza, I'd lose my mind and probably get ejected from the game because of something like that. That's a little unfair. Anyway, moving on. NL East. When we look at the odds versus the standings to win the NL East, there's not much of a difference. There isn't a difference, right? You got Phillies, heavy favorites. Phillies well in first place, up 6.5 games on everybody else there, right? Minus 800 favorites to win the division. They have been sort of struggling. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games. There was a point where they dropped 6 out of their last 9. So, little bit of a struggle there. It's a long season though, so it's bound to happen for every team at some point. But you're still up 6.5 games on the Braves. Braves aren't a complete team right now, but the Braves hold that last wild card spot. They had the top wild card spot for a very long time, and I kept saying, we kept saying, people kept saying in the comments and on TV, it doesn't make sense that they still have that spot, that top spot, and now they don't. Now they have the last wild card spot, which means they're closer to losing the wild card spot than keeping it. The odds for them right now, minus 450 to still make the playoffs. right? Plus 350 to not make the playoffs. So Vegas still has the Braves going, even though they're only up a game and a half on the wild card on the Mets, who are in their division. Chris Sale has anything to say about it, though, then that team goes to the playoffs. He's leading the NL in wins and ERA. And we know what Marcell Osuna's been doing. He's leading the NL in RBIs. So there's that. But the Mets are a game and a half back. But the Mets are 4-10 their last 10 games, right? You can't go under 500 for really any stretch if you're chasing a wild card. They were the wild card team, and now they lost it. Now they're a game and a half back, as we said. They are still minus 160 favorites to make, or no, minus 160 to not make the playoffs. Plus 135 underdog to make the playoffs. And I said it, I'm going to say it again. The smart move, yes, was to keep Pete Alonso. And when I talked to Met fans, their main concern was bullpen help. But I think they should have gotten starting pitching. I think they should have gone all in on starting pitching, really. Tarek Skubal's still a Detroit Tiger. Tarek Skubal could have very well been a New York Met, and it didn't happen. And I think that that's a move that wasn't made, that if the Mets were serious about this season, it's a move that should have been made. We'll see how it pans out, but, you know, you're holding on to the best season that Sean Manaea has pretty much ever had, which great that it's happening for you if you're the Mets, but that's a weird place to hang your hat on if that's where you want to ride into the playoffs. So let's move on to the NL Central, because there's not much else going on in the NL East with the Nationals and the Marlins. The NL Central, I wouldn't really call it the most volatile division anymore. When we look at the standings and the odds, the Brewers are the favorites still. They've been the favorites pretty much most of the season to win this division. They've been in first place pretty much most of the season. They're up 6 games in first place on the Cardinals, who are next. Look, the Brewers are going to win this division. I don't think there's much doubt. But the Brewers are not even in the top 10 favorites to win the World Series. There are wild card teams. There are teams that are barely going to make it, if they make it, that have higher favorited odds to win the World Series than the Milwaukee Brewers. And I get it. I don't see anything special about this Milwaukee Brewer team. Minus 490 to win their division right now. They'd be the only team to make the playoffs from the NL Central if the season were to end today. What do you do if you're the Brewers? I mean, it's a good division, so it's sad that they're going to be the only ones to make it, right? If the Cardinals can't somehow find their way in. But who is your guy in the playoffs on either side of the ball? Because your rotation right now is Freddie Peralta and Colin Rea. And I don't see that. I don't think even Milwaukee fans or the front office there see that as a World Series winning formula. And this is an organization that has yet to win a World Series. I don't think the Brewers have even been to a World Series. So why didn't you make bigger moves at the deadline? I'm not sure, but I don't think that it made sense to go about it the way you did. You've been a first round exit the last few years. Should have gone a little bigger here. But they didn't. For some reason, they're just comfortable with coasting into the division, and then that's it. Meanwhile, the Cardinals in second place in the Central, in the NL Central, 6 games back from the division, like we said, 3 back from the wild card, minus 475 to miss the playoffs. So essentially, what Vegas is saying and what pretty much everyone is saying is the only team that's going to go to the playoffs is whoever wins the division, and that's going to be the Brewers. Plus 375 favorites to make it. Minus 475 to miss the playoffs. Look, the Cardinals, they have so much money invested in this team. In veterans, right? They invested in Nolan Arenado. They invested in Paul Goldschmidt. They invested in Wilson Contreras. And none of them, since they've gotten them, have had a good year. Except Goldschmidt. Goldschmidt had one pretty good year for them. I stand corrected. But as a team, they haven't been able to do anything. They ended up in last place last year. And this year, it's looking like they're going to miss the playoffs again. And you know what? If the Cardinals miss the playoffs again this year, they need to seriously consider blowing this team up, restarting. Because you don't want to keep spending all this money for nothing. I'm sure there will be a team that could use an expensive third baseman, could use an expensive catcher, could use an expensive first baseman this offseason, come the winter meetings. Get it done if you can't get into the playoffs this year, because it's kind of gone. This is kind of the window, and it's going by the wayside because you're not having good years. Or maybe the problem is at the top in that dugout, in that clubhouse, and maybe the change is in order for Ali Marmol. But something's got to give. Because right now, the scarier team, besides the Brewers and you, right? But it's not you. It's not the Cardinals. I'd say the Pirates are scarier going forward. And I've said that. I said that last week. Minus 1,400, the Pirates, to not make the playoffs. So Vegas doesn't think they get in. 4 games back from the wild card. But they were much closer a week ago. They had a golden opportunity in this series against the D-backs, and they lost 2 out of 3. And they lost to the Padres last night. So they're squandering their chance to get in this season game by game. I mean, if they can beat the Padres the next 2 games, today and tomorrow, it makes a lot of changes in that wild card standing for sure. But they need a win. They really do. They need to look like the team they looked like a little over a week ago, because they can do it. They're not all the way out. But they've got to win these next 2 games. They need both. And then the other 2 teams in the NL Central, the Reds and the Cubs. Look, honestly, I want to be disappointed, but in reality, I can't be, because we knew this NL Central was going to be this volatile that it hurt. That it hurt the teams of the NL Central's chances to making it. They were going to beat up on each other, and one team was going to come out alive. So it's unfortunate, but maybe next year for Ellie De La Cruz and the Reds, maybe next year for Seiya Suzuki and the Cubs, they start their season in Japan. Maybe that'll be a catalyst for something special with Shota out there and Seiya against the Dodgers. So let's move on. Let's move on from the National League. Let's jump to the American League, and let's start out east. Shouldn't say out east because I'm east. But the Yankees, favorites to win the division. Not by much, though. Minus 200 to win the AL East. They're in first place, 7-3 in the last 10 games. The season that Aaron Judge is having is insane, especially after what he did a year ago. Leading the league in home runs again, and by a lot, right? He's in the 40s. To a point where he got intentionally walked 4 times against the Blue Jays. Another thing that happened for the Yankees was Gleyber Torres got benched mid-game by Aaron Boone. That's huge. That's not what you want to see going toward a playoff push, but what needs to be done needs to be done. And for Aaron Boone's job's sake, sometimes you got to bench guys in the middle of a game that aren't performing. But back to that Aaron Judge thing, walked intentionally 4 times versus the Blue Jays this past weekend. One of those intentional walks, he got the Barry Bonds treatment. Nobody on base, 2 outs. They intentionally walked Aaron Judge. Granted, in that game, the previous at bat, he hit a home run, so I get it. I wouldn't pitch to Aaron Judge. But nobody on. It's a rough look for the Blue Jays. It's a really good look for Aaron Judge because that's kind of a compliment, but not what you want to see. The Orioles, second place in the AL East by a half a game, and this is just because the rainout for the Yankees kind of made it a half a game deal. But they're playing a doubleheader today, the Yankees are. The Orioles, plus 180 to win the AL East, so second favorites. 6-4 in the last 10 games. Jackson Holliday's back, and he's good. 3 home runs since coming back to the major league. So seems like he just needed to go back down to AAA, recalibrate a little bit, calm down, take a breath, get a glass of water, shake it out, and then come back to the major leagues. And now he's doing it. And he's doing it at a pivotal time, which is really impressive because when he came in, it wasn't August, right? It was kind of early in the season. Now it's August. Now they need you to perform, and you're doing it. That's huge. That's huge for Jackson Holliday, and I'm super happy for him, for his dad, Matt Holliday, for that whole family, man. I love to see, I don't care what team it is, I love to see those big-time prospects really succeed. I think that's awesome for the game. There was a scout somewhere that hinged essentially their whole career on this player. So, I love to see that for all of those reasons. Now, this division is by no means decided. Both of these teams, as I mentioned earlier, when talking about the World Series odds, they keep flip-flopping between team that has the division in first place and the team that is the wild card team. They play each other again at the very end of September, the second to last series of the season for both of these teams is against each other. Do not be surprised if this is a 162 game decision for the AL East, right? Like we get through that series between the Yankees and Orioles and the division is still not decided. Don't be surprised if it comes all the way down to the wire. That's going to create a tired team, but it's going to be fun to watch for us. And then there's the Red Sox. Oh boy. What's happening in this American League wild card with the Red Sox and the Royals is so exciting for this game. Because these are two teams. Before I say all that, let's talk the Red Sox for a second. Minus 110 to make or not make the playoffs. Their odds are dead even. Vegas is saying it's going either way, fellas. It is going either way, ladies. It is going either way. Theys, thems, dogs, cats, aliens, anybody listening. It is going either way. And guess what? The Red Sox are a half game back in the wild card behind the Kansas City Royals. Guess who they play tonight? The Kansas City Royals. And it's game 3 of a 3-game set, and the Red Sox have won 2 out of 3 so far. So, if they win tonight, the Boston Red Sox are the wild card team going forward, right? Obviously, we've seen this flip-flop the last few weeks and months, but this is a huge game. And when you watch the games, they've been played like big games. And shout out to the Red Sox for coming out, winning them, making the AL East look good. Let's move on to the AL Central so we can talk a little more about this series in a second. But when you go to the Central, the odds versus the standings, boy, these odds have changed a lot too. Because, yes, the Guardians are still the favorites to win the Central, and they're still in first place. They're in first place by 4 games. But the odds are minus 175 for the Guardians to win the American League Central. That's not a lot. And especially when you consider the Minnesota Twins odds are plus 175. That's not a lot, guys. Those are live game odds that we're talking about. But those are the odds for that division. The Twins were my pick to win that division because when healthy, as I've said, the Minnesota Twins are one of the best teams in baseball. You got to get through Royce Lewis, Byron Buxton, and Carlos Correa, right? And now they've got your Kepler, right? And you've got your Jose Miranda. You've got all these guys that can really hit the ball, and they've got pitching that's looking good, and Pablo Lopez. I mean, they're a good team. Joe Ryan's pitching great. Simeon Woods Richardson is having a career year. Vegas has taken note. Vegas is saying plus 175. They're underdogs, but not by much to win the division. And they're 4 games back. 4 games. Now, when you talk about the Guardians, I mean, listen, they're a great team. They're a great team. And they're making me swallow my words all the time because I never, even now, looked at this Guardians roster name by name and said scary. Never. Stephen Kwan is having an amazing year. Josh Naylor is becoming one of the more prolific power hitters in the American League. Jose Ramirez is just Jose Ramirez. This guy can do everything. Fine. But I give a lot of credit to Stephen Vogt here. First year as a manager. He was a catcher literally 2 years ago. All right. That was yesterday. I give a lot of credit to what Stephen Vogt is doing with this team. Now, here's the other reason why I think Vegas is giving these odds, because we'll talk about it later, but we'll talk about it right now. I'll remind you guys later. This weekend, guess who plays each other? The Twins and the Guardians. They've got a 3-game series. And so the Twins, they have a big chance to close that gap. They're 4 games back. They get a sweep. All of a sudden, they're 1 game back, right? If the standings stay how they are. They get a sweep, they're 1 game back. The Guardians get a sweep, they really distance themselves, and they make it a 7-game difference, right? So Vegas is saying, listen, this upcoming series is going to be a big one, and I think it's probably going to be the biggest one this weekend, so make sure you guys are watching, whether you're a fan of these 2 teams or not, because there are a lot of playoff implications that happen, especially when you consider that wild card, that the Twins have that second wild card spot right now. If they lose all 3 games, remember, Kansas City's behind them with that 3rd spot, and the Red Sox are a half game back from that 3rd spot. So let's move on to the Royals. Again, that big game tonight between the Red Sox and Royals. The Royals have lost the last 2, and if they lose again, they give that wild card spot to the Boston Red Sox. So big game there. I can't wait to watch it. But I want to say this about the Royals and the Red Sox. No matter what happens this season, whether both teams make the wild card, whether one team makes it, whether neither team makes it, It's a successful season for the Red Sox and Royals. Now I get it, like no one likes to say that when you don't win a championship or you don't make the playoffs, but regardless, this is a successful season for two teams that were in rebuilds, the Red Sox and the Royals. Because if nothing else, you've ignited hope in this organization being potentially playoff bound in a rebuild year. And if you don't make it, if you're the Royals, guess what? You're getting a new stadium. Bobby Baseball is here for the long haul. Just did that. Vinny Pasquantino and Cole Reagans are in the early years of their contract, so they're under club control for a while. Seth Lugo, you got him through 2026. And if you're the Red Sox, Devers and Brian Bale are here for the long haul. And you just extended Alex Cora. You sent a message to the club, to the players, that you're serious. And those players love him. So there's a lot of hope for both of those teams' fan bases, for both of those organizations. And I'm happy for the fans of both of those teams going forward. Now, the Royals, minus 120 to make the playoffs. The Red Sox, like we said, minus 110 to make the playoffs. Again, this is a successful season for both of them, no matter what happens. Now, let's move on to the AL West, our last division of the podcast, and another wild, wild west in the American League because the Astros are the favorites to win the division. Up until last week, that was the Mariners. And when you look at the odds and the standings, Mariners are in first by half a game. But they're plus 110 to win the division. The Astros, second place by half a game, minus 135 to win the division. The Astros, 4-6 in the last 10 games. Mariners, 6-4 in the last 10 games. I don't think either team, though, made the splash they needed to at the deadline. But I think the Mariners needed to make it way more than the Astros did because the Mariners needed a lot of offense. They're still the best pitching rotation in baseball, but I don't think getting Randy Arozarena, who's struggling, was enough, or getting Justin Turner. I think they should have gone for Luis Robert Jr. from Chicago, but that's me. The Astros, on the other hand, they got Kikuchi, and Kikuchi's first start as an Astro was great, but he's been bad all season. So let's see what happens. Maybe that change of scenery really helps him. Framber Valdez almost had the second no-hitter of the week, but it was broken up by Corey Seager with a home run with 2 outs in the 9th inning. So shout out to Corey Seager for saying, nope, no, sir. You know, I want to know, if you're hitting and the guy up there's got a no-hitter going, is there ever a chance where like a player would take the at-bat off and say, all right, well, we lost this game anyway, might as well give this guy that no-hitter? Or are they just going for it every time? I don't know. I don't think the Rangers care too much about much of anything. They're minus 1,800 to even make the playoffs. 5 games back in the division. 8.5 back from the wild card. I mean, I think they're kind of calling it quits. They're good with their championship last year. First one in franchise history. I get it. So we'll give it to them. They don't really need to do much more. All right. My final thoughts for this week's episode. It's a little bit of a somber one, and if you keep up with the game, then you know where I'm going with this. Yesterday, MLB announced the passing of Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, Billy Beane, who was 60 years old and lost his battle with leukemia. Now, I never met Billy Beane personally. Obviously, I'm a nobody. I heard of Billy Beane when Moneyball came out and saw that he was actually the GM of the A's back in that early 2000s time, late 90s. It was one of my favorite movies to watch when I was in the military and really helped me understand some of what back then I understood as just the nuanced side of baseball, what we today call analytics, which leads me to my point. Anytime you turn on a baseball game today and tomorrow and really all season, they'll talk about how influential Billy Beane was, how Billy Beane was a nice guy, his sexuality and his position with Major League Baseball. But the game we see today is Billy Beane baseball. Every team in the MLB is essentially playing Moneyball. What used to be the most important hitting stat? Average. For centuries, all people cared about was average, was hitting for average. Billy Beane lost Jason Giambi to the Yankees and Johnny Damon to the Red Sox in the same offseason and found a new way to win the following season. He focused on hitters who got on base. Now, does that sound familiar? It should. Because now, when we watch game, what's the most important stat in a game? On base plus slugging. Now managers are making decisions, some more than others, in games based on the percentages, based on the numbers, the analytics. So essentially, we can credit Billy Beane with the new style of baseball we watch. So with that, I will say, rest in peace to Billy Beane, the father of modern baseball. So with that, big series is coming up this weekend. The Astros, they're at Fenway to take on the Red Sox. We talked about the Astros being in second place in the AL West, and the Red Sox, they're trying to get back into that wild card spot. Cardinals, they're going up against Kansas City, man. The Cardinals really need to try to make it happen. Kansas City, they're trying to fight and stay in that wild card. The Phillies, they're in the desert. They're playing against the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks, like we said, they're in that wild card race, second wild card spot versus the best team in the NL East. That's going to be a big series too. The Pirates trying to get back into the wild card race. They're playing against the Dodgers in Los Angeles. The Mets, they're playing against the Mariners. The Mets, 1.5 back from that wild card. Mariners trying to hold on to that AL West division. But I think the biggest series this weekend, like I mentioned earlier, Guardians and Twins. I think that's a pivotal series for both of those teams and for the playoff picture and the picture of the AL Central going forward. And big announcement coming out of MLB. There's going to be a game in Connecticut next year at Bristol Motor Speedway. I'm going to try to get there, but more importantly for me, I want to go to that Japan opening day series between the Cubs and Dodgers. Be on the lookout for GoFundMe link that will hopefully help me get to Tokyo, to the Tokyo Dome for those games. Other than that, it has been fun as always. Good night, good luck, and see you guys next week.